She thought he was just the brother, until the Alpha King stepped in and claimed her. The kingdom of Varelia lay under a veil of mist that never fully lifted. Its towers reached into the clouds, their stones etched with centuries of whispers, curses, and secrets. Villagers spoke in hushed tones about the Alpha King Raven, a man as feared as he was admired. They said his eyes could pierce the soul and his voice could command storms. Few dared approach the royal fortress, and fewer still returned unchanged. In a quiet village at the edge of the kingdom, Ilara lived a life of simple safety. She had grown up under the watchful care of Caius, the younger brother of the king. Caius was gentle, protective, and endlessly kind, everything a sister could hope for in a brother. He treated Ilara with a warmth that felt like sunlight breaking through the ever-present mist, and she trusted him with her heart entirely. Yet Ilara had always sensed that there was more to her world than the quiet routines of village life. Shadows whispered along the forest paths at night, and sometimes the wind carried a voice she could not recognize. Still, she pushed these feelings aside, preferring the comfort of Caius's guidance. The day began like any other. The village prepared for the Festival of Luminescence, a celebration of light that chased away the darkness of the long winter months. Lanterns were strung from every tree and doorway, their golden glow promising hope and safety. Children ran through the streets laughing as they carried candles, and merchants displayed their colorful wares. Ilara moved among them, her skirts brushing the cobblestones, a soft smile on her lips. Caius walked beside her, holding her hand lightly, his presence both reassuring and grounding. "You mustn't wander too far," he said gently. "The forest beyond these hills hides shadows you do not know." "I won't," she promised, though a part of her longed to see what lay beyond the village. She had heard tales of the king's fortress, perched like a black jewel on the cliff above the kingdom. Some said it was cursed, that those who entered its gates never returned the same. Others whispered of the Alpha King, who could bind both hearts and wills with his gaze. Ilara laughed softly at the thought. How could a man, no matter how fearsome, matter to her? Her heart had never known love beyond the familial bond she shared with Caius. As the festival reached its height, the villagers gathered in the central square, where the festival relic, a crystalline orb said to hold protective magic, was displayed. Its surface shimmered with faint lights, and the elders instructed everyone to approach it carefully. Ilara, curious and brave, stepped closer than most. Caius followed immediately, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. When her fingers brushed the orb, a sudden surge of warmth shot through her arm. A glowing mark appeared on her wrist, a sigil that pulsed like a heartbeat. The crowd gasped. The elders' faces turned pale.
"It has chosen her,"
one whispered, his voice trembling. "The mark. It cannot be removed by ordinary means." Ilara stared at her wrist, heart pounding. The sigil seemed alive, tiny lines weaving and shifting as if trying to speak. Caius's grip tightened. "We need to get you to the king," he said, his voice urgent but controlled. Only he can know what to do." The name of Raven sent a shiver through her. She had never met him, but the stories of his power had haunted her imagination since childhood. Tall, unyielding, a figure of myth wrapped in flesh. And now, for reasons she could not understand, he was the only one who could help her. By nightfall, the king had arrived. The air trembled with the sound of hooves striking stone, and the sky darkened as if the clouds themselves bowed to his presence. Raven dismounted at the village square, his dark cloak billowing, his eyes like twin obsidian flames. Every villager fell silent. The only sound was the wind rustling the banners above. He approached Ilara slowly, his gaze fixed on the glowing sigil. There was no warmth in his expression, only an intensity that made her stomach twist. "You bear a mark not meant for mortal hands," he said, his voice low, deliberate.
"It will bind you to me until it is broken."
"Bind me? What do you mean?" Raven's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, more shadow than comfort. "The mark chooses. It has chosen you. And by law and magic, I am bound to protect what it touches." Caius stepped forward, his chest rigid with a mixture of fear and defiance. "She is not yours to claim," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "She is under my care. Her life, her will, belongs to no one but her own." Raven's gaze shifted briefly to Caius, and for the first time his eyes softened. There was something in the younger man's loyalty that he recognized, perhaps even respected. But his attention returned to Alara immediately, sharper than a blade. "The law is absolute," he said. "The bond is not a choice. Resistance only prolongs the inevitable." Alara felt a cold fear curl in her chest, but beneath it a strange heat began to grow, a fluttering that made her pulse quicken. She did not understand it. How could a man she had never known inspire such a reaction? She wanted to resist, to run into Caius's arms, to find safety in the life she had always known. Yet every fiber of her being felt drawn to the king in a way she could not explain. "Come," Raven said, extending a hand, not in threat but in command. "You will stay with me until the sigil fades. It is for your protection and mine." Caius's hands clenched at his sides. "If you touch her, king, I swear." Raven's eyes met his, cutting him off without a word. There was a power in the king's presence that demanded obedience. Caius faltered, knowing he could not oppose it without risking both their lives. Reluctantly, he nodded, signaling Alara to go with Raven. The journey to the fortress was quiet, save for the sound of the horses' hooves on stone and the occasional whisper of the wind. Alara's mind raced, fear, curiosity, and something deeper, a longing she did not yet understand, swirled together. When they arrived at the castle, the gates closed behind them with a sound that echoed like a thunderclap. The corridors were vast, lined with statues of past kings and warriors, their eyes seeming to follow her. Shadows flickered against the walls, and the air smelled faintly of iron and old magic. Raven led her to a chamber high in the tallest tower. From its windows she could see the kingdom sprawled beneath the clouds, lights like stars scattered across the land. For a moment she felt the weight of the world pressing down, and the tiny, fragile possibility that she might survive it. "You are safe here," Raven said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "The mark is tied to your soul. I will watch over you, but do not mistake this for kindness. The bond demands obedience, and it will test you." Alara swallowed, staring at the sigil glowing faintly on her wrist. I don't understand any of this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You will," Raven replied. "In time all will be clear. But for now, know this. You are mine now, not in body, but in fate. And fate is not easily denied." As he left the room, closing the heavy door behind him, Alara pressed her hand to the sigil. It pulsed warmly, as if alive, echoing her heartbeat. She felt both terrified and drawn toward the unseen threads that bound her to the king. Hours passed. The night deepened. And then, as the wind howled against the tower, a shadow moved across the room. Alara's eyes widened. The air felt charged, alive with the king's presence. "Do not fear," a voice whispered from the darkness. It was soft, commanding, intimate. "You are bound to me whether you wish it or not." Her heart thundered. She knew she could not run. And deep down she felt a thrill she could not name, an instinct that this bond, dangerous as it was, would change her forever. Outside, the storm grew louder, the sky darkening as if the kingdom itself had heard the king's claim. And in that moment, Alara realized her life, as she had known it, had ended. She had entered a world of shadows, power, and ancient magic, and there was no turning back. The night stretched endlessly, and the sigil glowed brighter than before, a silent promise of trials, secrets, and desires yet to come. And somewhere beyond the walls of the tower, Ravine watched, his thoughts a tangle of duty, desire, and a darkness that had never before wavered. She was his, and the kingdom would tremble for it. The castle of Borrelia rose like a dark sentinel over the land, its walls stretching into clouds that hid the moon. Within its halls, silence reigned, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps and the distant howl of wind. Elara sat alone in her tower chamber, the glow of the sigil on her wrist casting shadows that danced across the stone walls. She traced its lines with trembling fingers, trying to understand why it had chosen her, and why it bound her to Raven, the Alpha King she barely knew. The room door opened with a muted creak. She flinched. He stepped inside, the shadows of the torchlight flickering across his sharp features. Raven's presence was commanding, yet in the quiet of the chamber, it carried something almost vulnerable. "Do not hide from me," he said softly, his voice carrying authority without anger. "The sigil binds you, yes, but it does not dictate your heart, yet it will test it." Elara rose, clutching her cloak to her chest. "Test it? How?"
I don't understand. Why me?
I've done nothing to deserve this." Raven stepped closer, each movement deliberate, measured. The mark chooses without reason. It sees what the eye cannot. Courage, strength, the potential to survive the dark. He paused, studying her face. "You will learn to harness it, whether willingly or not, and in doing so, you will draw closer to me." Elara's heart pounded. She wanted to run, to flee from the tower and the king's gaze, but something in her chest told her she could not. The pull was magnetic, terrifying, irresistible. "Draw closer," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Raven replied. "The bond is not only magical, it is emotional. It forces proximity, connection. And if you resist, it will test you harder." Caius had warned her of the king's power, but the truth was far more unsettling than any tale he could have told. Fear twisted inside her, but beneath it, a strange thrill took root. The next morning, Raven led her through the castle, moving with the silent authority of a predator surveying his domain. The corridors were lined with statues of past kings, their eyes hollow yet piercing, and tapestries that told stories of battles, curses, and ancient magic. Every step they took made Elara aware of her vulnerability and of the king's presence behind her, always close, always watching. "You must learn your limits," Raven said as they walked. "The sigil is not just a mark, it is a key. One day, it will unlock abilities within you you cannot yet imagine." "I don't even know what it wants from me," Elara replied, her voice tight with tension. "Why am I special?" Raven's dark eyes softened just slightly. "Special is not the word I would choose. Chosen, perhaps. Tested. You have something the sigil recognized. Strength, yes, but also resilience. Most would break under its touch. You may survive it." She swallowed hard. The weight of his words settled in her chest. Survival was not a promise. It was a challenge. And the closer she felt to the king, the more she realized that the challenge was as much about him as it was about her. In the castle's library, the hours stretched long and quiet. Raven instructed her on the sigil's magic, showing her how to summon small sparks of energy, how to listen to its rhythm, how to calm it when it pulsed too violently. The lessons were difficult and often painful. The magic seemed to flow through her veins like fire, burning, thrilling, and frightening all at once. During one lesson, her hand brushed against his as they both reached for the same ancient tome. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her, one that made her pulse race. Raven's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, a storm of thought hidden in the depths of his eyes. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly. "The connection?" The truth was, she did feel it. Every touch, every glance, every word between them carried weight, pulling her closer even as her mind screamed that this was impossible. "The bond is not your enemy," he said. "It is guidance. It shows you the path forward, but it will not be easy. And it will test you, and me, in ways we cannot yet foresee." Outside, the kingdom was restless. Strange storms whipped across the countryside, black clouds streaked with violet lightning. Shadows crept into villages, moving unnaturally, as though aware of the bond forming between king and mark. Couriers rode to distant lords with urgent messages, and whispers spread that the king's claim had awakened forces long dormant. Back in the castle, Caius paced the halls, unable to stop thinking about Alara. The brotherly love he had always felt for her now collided with something more, protective, urgent, and impossible to name. He hated that he could not confront Raven directly. The king's authority was absolute, and yet he feared that each passing day without action might bind Alara irrevocably. He paused outside her tower door, hand hovering over the latch. He wanted to knock, to demand that she speak to him, to reassure her that she had choices. But when he remembered the king's warning and the fire in Raven's eyes, he stepped back, swallowed his frustration, and walked away, his heart heavy with helplessness. One evening the sigil flared violently, and the castle trembled as though it were alive. Alara had been practicing in the library, trying to focus, when the magic surged beyond her control. Books flew from shelves, pages tore themselves free, and the air shimmered with raw power. Raven appeared instantly, moving with terrifying precision. He threw himself between her and the surge, absorbing the impact of the energy with a protective shield of his own. Sparks danced across his skin, yet he did not falter. Alara watched, awestruck and terrified, as the king's strength revealed itself fully, not just in magic, but in the fierce care he showed for her. "You must control it," he shouted over the roar of energy, "or it will destroy you and everything around you." "I'm trying," Alara cried, tears streaking her face. "I can't. You can," Raven snapped, his voice cutting through the chaos. His eyes softened as he added almost gently, "I believe in you, and you will believe in yourself, or I will not leave this room until you do." For the first time, Alara felt a fragile surge of confidence. She focused on the rhythm of the sigil, letting it guide her, letting it flow through her like a current. Slowly, painfully, the magic obeyed. The room calmed, the books settled, and the energy dimmed. Raven stepped back, chest heaving, but there was a rare glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "You are learning. But this is only the beginning." Days passed. Alara's lessons continued, and with each passing moment, her understanding of the sigil and of her own strength grew. She also began to notice subtler things about Raven. The way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. The brief moments of hesitation when he spoke of himself. The shadows in his gaze when he remembered his past. One night she found him in the tower garden staring at the kingdom below. The moonlight illuminated the sharp lines of his face, the cloak around his shoulders moving with the wind like a living thing. "Why do you always stand here alone?" she asked quietly. Raven did not turn immediately. "The kingdom is heavy with expectation," he said finally. "A king must always be vigilant." "But," his voice faltered, "sometimes I wonder if I am vigilant enough for them, for myself, for the ones I care about." Alara's heart quickened. She had glimpsed vulnerability in him before, but never so openly.
"Do you care for anyone?" she asked softly.
He turned, his dark gaze catching hers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he whispered, "I care for those who cannot protect themselves, and for the ones who are bound to me by fate." Alara swallowed. She did not know if he meant her, or if the weight of his words was only about the kingdom. Yet her pulse thrummed with a dangerous hope. The bond between them was growing, invisible yet undeniable. Suddenly a chilling cry echoed through the castle. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of the garden, flickering like living things. Raven's eyes darkened. He stepped forward, placing himself between Alara and the shadows. "Do not be afraid," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, I will not let it touch you." The shadows recoiled from him, then vanished, leaving only the echo of their cries. Alara's hand went to her wrist instinctively, where the sigil pulsed calmly now, as if soothed by the king's protection. For the first time she realized the truth. She was not just marked by magic. She was entangled in something far larger, something that required trust, courage, and a willingness to surrender to forces she could not yet comprehend. And as she looked into Raven's eyes, she understood another truth, far more dangerous than magic or curses. Her heart was no longer entirely her own. That night, as the castle slept beneath the storm clouds, Raven stood outside her chamber door. His hand rested lightly on the carved wood, hesitating, almost reluctant. "You are mine now," he said, voice low and certain, "and the bond will not be denied. Fear it, resist it, even fight it, it does not matter. The sigil has chosen, and so have I." Elara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the pulse of the mark, the pull of the king, and the strange, growing warmth in her own heart. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the familiar comfort of Caius, yet she knew she could not. The threads of fate were already weaving tightly around her. The bond had begun, and nothing, no fear, no hesitation, could undo it. The castle of Veralia was silent except for the whisper of wind through the tall stone corridors. Yet the quiet was deceptive. Shadows lingered in corners, moving in ways that made the heart race, and the air carried the scent of power, ancient and untamed. Elara stood in the highest tower, looking down at the kingdom below. The sigil on her wrist pulsed steadily now, almost like a heartbeat in tune with her own. Over the past days she had learned to control its energy, though never fully. Each lesson with Raven had been exhausting, challenging her in ways she could not have imagined. He had grown closer too, not in gestures of affection, but in attention, in intensity. He watched her with a vigilance that bordered on obsession, yet it was protective, necessary. And though she tried to resist, she felt it, the pull toward him, subtle but relentless, like tides tugging at a stranded ship. The first hint that the curse's power was rising came one evening. The castle's corridors trembled with distant echoes, and faint violet sparks danced across the stone floors. Servants whispered of shadows moving in the halls, of strange shapes glimpsed in the corners of their eyes. Raven appeared beside her without warning. "The mark is stronger than before," he said, his voice tight. "It is not content to lie dormant. It seeks a connection, full, unbroken, and willing, or it will force one." Elara's stomach turned. "Force one?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Raven said simply. "The magic does not ask for consent. It only binds. And if it senses resistance, it can burn, wound, or worse." Her fingers brushed the sigil nervously. "Oh, what happens if I can't control it?" Raven's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Then I must. I will not let it harm you. But you must trust me completely." Trust. The word weighed heavy on her tongue. Could she trust him? She had come to know his strength, his discipline, his intelligence. But could she trust that the man behind the crown would not break her heart, or worse, break her entirely? The next morning, Raven led Elara into the hidden chambers beneath the castle. Ancient tomes lined the walls, their spines gilded with symbols of forgotten magic. Candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets she could almost understand. "This is where the blood of kings meets the power of old magic," Raven explained, stepping past a shelf filled with scrolls. "And it is where you will learn the truth about the sigil. And yourself." Elara followed, heart pounding. Each step brought her closer to knowledge, yet also closer to the king she both feared and could not resist. "You have seen my strength," he said quietly, eyes flicking to hers, "but you have yet to see the cost of it. My power is not without burden. Every choice I make carries consequences, sometimes for the kingdom, sometimes for those I care for." I don't understand," she said, voice shaking. "You mean the sigil?" He nodded. "It is not just magic. It is tied to fate, to life and death, to bonds that cannot be broken easily. And you, Elara, you are now part of that chain. I cannot protect you fully unless you understand it." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to run from this truth, yet a small, stubborn part of her wanted to stay, to learn, to understand. Over the next days, their lessons grew more intense. Elara discovered that the sigil could amplify her emotions, her courage, her fear, and her determination. When she felt anger, flames of energy leapt from her fingertips. When she felt despair, shadows clung to her like living things. and always, the king was there, not to restrain her, but to guide, to correct, to challenge. During one lesson, her hand met his again while practicing a spell. The surge of energy between them was undeniable. Alara's heart pounded, and she quickly withdrew, flustered. "You cannot deny it," Raven said softly, his eyes dark, unreadable. "The bond responds to more than magic. It responds to your heart, to your mind, to the desire you do not yet admit to yourself." Alara shook her head, retreating a step. I am not ready for that. I cannot." "You are," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "And one day you will understand that denying it only weakens you. The sigil does not lie. It sees what you cannot see in yourself." Her hands trembled. She wanted to resist, yet every word, every glance from him seemed to pull her further into a connection she could neither name nor ignore. Outside the castle, the kingdom grew restless. Storms raged with unnatural intensity, lightning splitting the skies in jagged streaks. Shadows crept across the villages, whispering in voices no mortal could hear. Couriers warned of disturbances near the borders, and rumors spread that the Alpha King's bond with the marked woman had awakened forces long dormant. Inside the castle, Caius paced the halls, desperate to protect Alara but powerless against the king's claim. He remembered the warmth of her hand in his, the trust she had always placed in him, and the fear that she was slipping further into the king's world, one from which there was no turning back. "I cannot let this happen," he muttered to himself. "She is mine to protect, and yet I cannot interfere." One night, as moonlight streamed through the tower windows, Alara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the castle gardens, the sigil glowing faintly on her wrist. Raven followed silently, almost as if he had always been there. "Why do you watch me so closely?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I must," he replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. "The bond demands vigilance. But also because I care for your safety more than I can admit aloud." Alara's chest tightened. She wanted to ask more, to understand the man behind the crown, the one who had claimed her fate. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she glanced at the sigil, feeling its warmth against her skin. "You are not just learning magic," Raven continued. "You are learning yourself, and in time you will understand that the strength you seek is within you." Her heart ached with longing, with fear, with something unnamed. She wanted to trust him fully, yet a small voice whispered caution. She remembered Caius, the brother who had always protected her, the man she had known her whole life, and she felt the cruel sting of choice. The bond with the king was real, undeniable, yet it demanded a surrender she could not yet give. Suddenly the sigil flared violently, brighter than ever before. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Shadows rose from the garden floor, curling like smoke, whispering in languages she could not understand. Raven moved instantly, stepping in front of her. Energy crackled around his hands, forming a shield that pushed the shadows back. "Stay behind me," he commanded, voice low and steady. "Do not let fear control you. Trust the bond, trust yourself, and trust me." Alara pressed her hands to the sigil, letting its warmth flow through her. Slowly, shakily, she found the rhythm within the chaos. The shadows recoiled, hissed, and finally vanished, leaving only the night wind and the faint glow of the sigil. "You did well," Raven said, lowering his hands. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his dark gaze fixed on her. This is the beginning. The bond grows stronger, and so does the magic, but so do the dangers." Alara felt a thrill she could not name. Fear, yes, but also exhilaration. She had faced the storm and survived, guided by the king's presence, the bond, and her own strength. The days that followed were filled with more training, more discoveries, and a growing closeness between Alara and Raven. He shared pieces of his past, stories of loss, betrayal, and loneliness that shaped the man he had become. For the first time, Alara saw beyond the king, glimpsing the human beneath the legend. "You have seen my strength," he said one evening in the tower. "The kingdom spread beneath them like a tapestry. But you must also see my weakness. And if you choose to stay by my side, you will see it in ways few ever do." Alara swallowed, her pulse quickening. She had never known a man like him. Commanding, dangerous, yet capable of vulnerability. The bond between them had grown from magic to something more. A connection that was both terrifying and irresistible. And yet, in the quiet of her heart, she felt a pang for Caius, for the brotherly love she had always known. She did not yet understand where her loyalties should lie, or how to reconcile the pull of fate with the longing of the heart. That night, as a storm raged outside, Alara lay awake. The sigil glowed faintly on her wrist, pulsing like a heartbeat. She knew the bond was growing stronger, linking her to the king in ways she could not yet control. Somewhere in the castle, Raven watched her door, silent and still. His thoughts were tangled with duty, desire, and a darkness he could not fully reveal. The bond had deepened. The shadows were rising, and the path forward was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with a promise that neither of them could deny. The storm had only just begun, and when it broke, nothing would be the same. The winds of Aurelia had grown wild, tearing through the kingdom with a ferocity that mirrored the unrest within the castle walls. Villagers hid in their homes as violet lightning split the sky and shadows slithered along the edges of the forests, unnatural and foreboding. The sigil on Alara's wrist glowed brighter than ever, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire kingdom. She stood beside Raven in the castle's highest tower, overlooking the storm, his dark cloak whipped around him, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the forces of the curse stirred. Both of them could feel the tension in the air, not just in the world outside, but in the bond that tied them together. The sigil, Raven said, voice low but firm, is awakening fully. Its power is no longer contained. If we do not act, it will consume more than just this kingdom. Alara nodded, though fear tightened in her chest. She had grown stronger in the past days, learning to channel the magic that flowed through her. Yet the sigil was unpredictable, and even now its power pulsed like a heartbeat of fire against her skin. "I don't know if I can control it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if I fail?" Raven stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet grounding. "Then I will be here," he said simply. "I will not let it destroy you, not while I still draw breath." The sincerity in his eyes stirred something deep within her, a feeling that was both terrifying and comforting. She wanted to trust him completely, but trust, she realized, was not given lightly. It was earned in the small moments, in shared fear and shared courage. The source of the curse awaited them in the forest beyond the castle, a place older than memory, where the trees whispered of forgotten gods and magic that predated the kingdom itself. Together, they descended into the storm, the sigil glowing brighter with every step. Shadows danced along the roots of gnarled trees, whispering unintelligible words, testing their resolve. "You must focus," Raven instructed. "The bond is strongest now. Your power and mine are linked through it. If you falter, the shadows will consume us both." Alara nodded, hands trembling slightly. She had spent countless hours training, learning to sense the flow of magic within her. Now, it was time to trust herself and him fully. As they reached a clearing, a figure emerged from the storm. The being was neither wholly human nor entirely spirit. Its form shimmered with dark energy, and eyes glowed like molten silver. The air around it crackled, and the sigil on Alara's wrist burned with an almost unbearable intensity. "This is it," Raven said, "the source of the curse. It has been drawn to you because of the bond. Only together can we face it."
Alara took a deep breath.
She could feel the king's strength beside her, steady and unwavering. And she could feel the sigil, pulsing not with fear, but with potential. She clenched her fists and whispered, "I'm ready." The being advanced, shadows coiling around it like serpents. Its voice was like 1,000 whispers, all at once. You dare approach me, child of fate? It hissed. You carry power you cannot comprehend. And you, Alpha King, think you can control it? Raven stepped forward, the energy around him crackling. We are not afraid of you, he declared. Your darkness will not touch what is mine to protect. The creature lunged, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. Shadows whipped toward them, but the sigil flared as Alara raised her hands. Energy surged from her fingertips, weaving with Raven's power to form a barrier that held the shadows at bay. The battle was not one of weapons, but of wills. Every strike, every pulse of energy, tested their trust in each other. Raven's voice guided her, steady and commanding, while her instincts and newfound strength added force to their combined magic. The bond between them resonated, a rhythm of two hearts and two wills aligned against the darkness. You are stronger than you think, Raven said, as they pushed the being back. Do not doubt yourself. Alara felt the truth of it. Every fear, every doubt, every hesitation had been melted away by the intensity of the moment. Her power was real. Her will was her own. And with Raven beside her, they were unstoppable. The creature shrieked, recoiling from the force of their combined magic. No, this cannot be, it hissed. But the bond was too strong, their connection too pure. The sigil pulsed once more, brighter than ever, and then, with a blinding flash, the darkness shattered. Alara collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her wrist still glowing faintly. Raven caught her, his hand steady and strong. You did it, he whispered, relief in his voice. We did it. Tears of exhaustion and triumph ran down her cheeks. She looked up at him, and in that moment she understood the depth of the bond they shared, not just through magic, but through courage, trust, and something far older than either of them could name. The storm cleared, leaving the kingdom bathed in the soft glow of dawn. Birds sang tentatively, and the air smelled of rain and renewal. The shadows had vanished, and with them, the immediate threat of the curse. Raven and Alara stood together atop the cliff where the battle had ended. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and something softer, more human than she had ever seen. You have grown, he said. Stronger than I imagined. Braver than the world could ever demand. Alara smiled faintly. I could not have done it without you, she admitted. She stopped, realizing that words could not fully capture the tumult of her heart. Raven took her hand gently. You are not just marked by fate, Alara, he said softly. You are part of it. And whatever comes next, whatever trials remain, we will face them together. Her chest tightened. She had feared surrender, feared losing herself, feared that the bond would take more than it gave. But standing beside him, she understood. The bond did not enslave her. It empowered her. It had forced her to see her own strength and to trust not just the king, but herself. Caius approached cautiously from the path below, silent but watchful. He had returned from the village, hearing of the battle and fearing the worst. When he saw them together, he understood at last that Alara had grown beyond his protection, not in heart, but in spirit. You are safe, he said quietly, bowing his head in respect.
And I see you are stronger than I ever knew.
I will guard the kingdom, but your path is yours to walk. Alara smiled at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. He nodded, stepping back, leaving them alone. And in that moment Alara realized the truth of her journey. She had been protected, guided, and tested, but the final step had been hers to take. Raven turned to her, the wind tossing his hair around his face. Alara, he said, voice low and steady. The sigil has faded. The curse is gone, but the bond, it remains. And it always will. Stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, stronger than anything else. Her wrist was bare now. The mark of it lingered in her heart. She reached for him, feeling the steady beat of his hand in hers. Then we face what comes next. Together, she said. He nodded, pulling her close, but not too close,
respecting the newfound independence she had earned.
Together, he agreed. The kingdom below began to stir, the people unaware of the battle that had raged above them, unaware that the darkness had been defeated, the curse broken. The world was quiet, peaceful, and yet alive with promise. Elara looked at Raven, seeing the man behind the legend, the Alpha King who had claimed her fate, yet had never demanded her heart blindly. He had guided her, challenged her, protected her, and in doing so, he had allowed her to discover her own strength. And in the quiet dawn atop the cliffs of Varelia, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The trials had ended, the shadows had fled, and the bond that had begun in fear had transformed into something enduring, something pure, something unbreakable. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying with it a promise. The future was theirs to shape, and whatever darkness might rise again, they would meet it as one. Elara smiled, the first true smile she had allowed herself in weeks. "We have survived," she said softly. Rabin's dark eyes met hers, the storm of the past behind them, the light of the future before them. "Yes," he said, voice steady and sure, "and we will endure because we face it together." The sigil had gone, but the bond remained, silent, eternal, and unyielding. And for the first time, Elara understood the true meaning of strength, courage, and love. As dawn bathed the kingdom in golden light, the world seemed to sigh in relief. And in that moment, Elara and Rabin stood side by side, bound not by magic alone, but by trust, respect, and the unbreakable rhythm of hearts aligned. The storm had passed, the shadows had faded, and yet, in the whisper of the wind, a promise lingered. The bond could not be undone, and the world would remember the courage, the trials, and the love that had been forged in darkness. The Alpha King and the marked woman, together, they had faced the impossible. And together, they would endure, forever bound by destiny, choice, and the courage to embrace both.